Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you all to today's virtual education event, How Exercise Helps Parkinson's, the Science and Personal Stories. The registration was amazing for this talk and tells us that we really have a topic here that's of great interest to our community. Based on this, we're recording today's discussion. My name's Mike Mulligan. I am the Community Health Education Coordinator here at Parkinson's Resources of Oregon, and I'm joined by Anna Sanger-Reed, our Program Director, and she'll be helping me today in managing the event. Just a few quick housekeeping items for you. As we mentioned in the reminder email, today's talk is our first using the Zoom webinar platform. For those of you that have attended previous Virtual Pro events, there are just a few changes. The most noticeable you'll see is that your camera and microphone have been turned off. You'll only be able to see our presenters. As in the past, you can ask questions using or share anything that's pertinent to the discussion in the chat feature. We encourage you to do this throughout today's presentation. Please, though, be aware that what you're sharing can be seen by everybody that's participating. The chat function is normally found in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen on your Zoom account. Also, we ask you to keep your questions today general in nature, as our guests do not know your specific situation or don't know, you can only give general guidance or information. I now want to introduce our panel of presenters. Jennifer Wilhelm has a doctorate in physical therapy. She works closely with the Parkinson Center at OHSU and is also a researcher at OHSU's Gait and Balance Laboratory. Jenny is a part of Team PD, which stands for Therapists Educated and Aligned in the Management of Parkinson's Disease, and has taught throughout the region with an interdisciplinary team on best practices for Parkinson's. Nancy Nelson has a certification through the American Council on Exercise as a certified personal trainer. Nancy is a Parkinson's disease exercise specialist who's based in Bend with over 40 years of experience in the health and wellness industry. Nancy has been the exercise therapy manager for Power in Tucson and is a member of the Power Professional Education faculty. Nancy continues to teach Parkinson's exercise classes and also facilitates one of PRO's support groups. Nancy Barlow also has certification through ACE as a group fitness instructor and is also PRO's wellness coordinator, has been offering Parkinson's-specific exercise classes for over 20 years. Nancy also holds certification in multiple Parkinson's exercise programs, including Power, Delay the Disease, and Rocksteady Boxing. Nancy has taught the exercise intervention portion of multiple research studies at OHSU's Balance Lab, including one currently. We also are very privileged today to join with us Jeannie Parker, Amy LaValle, and Rick Phelps. Jeannie, Amy, and Rick will share with us their personal experiences and tips about Parkinson's-specific exercise programs. I now want to turn it over to our panel, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Next slide. Fantastic. So just to give you kind of a high-level overview, I'm going to be going over history and new exercise recommendations, as well as some specific exercise options for people with Parkinson's disease. Then Nancy Nelson's going to take it over, and Nancy Barlow is going to finish our presentation. We're hoping to take about 30 minutes with our presentation. Then our true experts, those living with Parkinson's, are going to tell you how they really get exercise into their daily life, which I think is going to be super important with the panel. And then we hope to leave a good 30 minutes or so for questions and answers from you guys to really any of us that are talking today. Next slide. When we were preparing for this, we kind of laughed because both Nancy Barlow and Nancy Nelson used this slide in various forms. This was the past director of the National Institute of Aging, Dr. Butler's quote, in which case he said, if exercise could be packed into a pill, it would be the single most widely prescribed and beneficial medicine in the nation. And I think this is really important in the fact that most of you, I'm assuming, are either living with Parkinson's or have someone with Parkinson's in your life. And it really doesn't matter if it's you're living with Parkinson's or you're a care partner for someone with Parkinson's. Exercise is important for Parkinson's, but probably any other comorbidity you might have. And so I think with Parkinson's, we really think about the importance of, are you on medication? Are you off medication? What medications are you taking? And just as important that medication is, exercise should be that important as well. Next slide. So here's a little history graph of Parkinson's and exercise. And you can see on the top that looking back into the early 1900s, 1899, these were kind of the dark ages, in which case the quote that I could find from an article was, life should be quiet and regular, freed, and as far as may be from care and work. In which case some of you might think, oh, that sounds so wonderful. And wouldn't it be nice if I could live every day like that? But the truth of it is carbidopa levodopa or Sinemet wasn't commercially available until 1975, which is crazy to think because that was only 50 years ago. And so prior to that, there was no real treatment for people with Parkinson's, in which case, if you can imagine not going with any of your medications, it might be really hard to think about doing some of the exercises that you've either heard about or you're currently doing. So that's where things were in the early 1900s. For the most part, we just gave chair exercises and stretching and said that was it. After medications came upon us, people with Parkinson's were able to do a whole lot more. And so in the 2000s, there were a whole series of animal studies showing how high intensity exercise could be neuroprotective. Now, something that's important to consider is when it comes to Parkinson's, there's not a great test to really see what's happening in your brain. So these exercise studies that have been done in animals, they are able to sacrifice the animal at the end of the study, look at the brain of the animal and really see what's happening in the substantia nigra in terms of how much dopamine is being made. Obviously, we can't do that in adults. So that's kind of where that research has kind of stopped so far as we have shown it to be beneficial in animals, but we don't truly know what's happening with humans. But in the 2010s, there is a huge increase in clinical trials, in which case I'm going to tell you about a few of those today, and perhaps some of you have even partaken in them. Next slide. So I always include this slide in my presentations, in which case on the y-axis, so on the far left, you can see how much dopamine there is in the brain. And on the x-axis, which is the bottom line, you can see someone's age. The black line is considered normal person. I did not name this normal person. This was taken from a paper, but this is someone without Parkinson's. So you can see the thought is as we age, all of our brains are making less dopamine over time. This is a normal aging process, according to this graph. There's a lot of theory in this graph. So then there's this blue line. There's a question mark. If I don't have Parkinson's and I exercise, can I shift the kind of slope of that graph? Can I change the way my brain is slowing down how much dopamine is being made? So potentially I could maybe live a little bit longer or maybe have a better quality of life while I live. We don't know that. Again, there's not a great way to look at how much dopamine there is in the brain. Then we have the red line. So here's a person that's, quote, vulnerable to someone with Parkinson's. So you can see there's a line that says overt Parkinson's. This is when they're diagnosed with Parkinson's. And there's a question mark of, as soon as you get diagnosed with Parkinson's, if you start exercising, can you again shift that line over? Can you decrease the slope of degeneration with exercise? There's the question mark. There's also people that are considered vulnerable. Maybe you have a higher risk in terms of you grew up on a farm and were exposed to pesticides. Maybe you have a high family history. So maybe you don't wait until you have Parkinson's. You just are concerned about it. And so maybe then you start exercising before you start showing lines. That's the dot, or before you start showing signs. That's the dotted line. Again, can you shift that graph? The important thing I think that this graph shows is we don't know for sure what exercise is doing to the brain. We do theorize that exercise is symptom modifying. So you can have better symptoms and have a better quality of life with exercise, even if we don't know for sure it's disease modifying. Next slide. With that said, this was an article that just came out a few months ago for movement disorders. And I think it really shows beautifully the importance of exercise that I kind of have with the arrow as a core component to this holistic wellness plan, but it's only one petal of this beautiful flower. So as all of the studies have been coming out of exercise is so important, I have some of my patients spending lots of money and lots of time on exercise, but I think it's really important that we do other aspects as well, that we're getting good quality sleep, that we're having good food, that we're having meaningful engagement and social connectedness. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about group exercise and how maybe that could fill the social connection piece. But again, I think just as exercise is important, it's important to kind of live out all these other components in your life as well. Next slide. So, how should I be exercising? One huge paradigm shift is this high intensity seems to be better. So, this came from a study almost 10 years ago. It was called the Sparks 2 study, in which case they took a third of the people and had them exercise at 80 to 85% of your max heart rate. For those of you who don't know what that feels like, you're exercising really hard. You're going to have a hard time breathing and you're going to be sweating a lot. Then they had a third of the people exercising at 60 to 65% of their max heart rate. That's kind of going for a decent speed walk, probably with your friends. And then they had usual care. All of these people with the heart rate were walking 3 to 4 times a week on a treadmill with the help of a trainer. And they did that for 6 months. What you can see on the y-axis, so the vertical line, is how much change there was on the UPDRS motor scale in 6 months. This is what your neurologist likely does to you when you go in and see. So it's looking at tremor, it's looking at stiffness, it's looking at the finger taps and how your movement is. So theoretically, if I have you exercising a lot, you might be stronger, you might have better endurance, but this is looking at those cardinal Parkinson symptoms that may not just change little with exercise alone. You can see for the 88 to 85%, there was a large spread. There's some dots that got a whole lot worse and some dots that got a whole lot better. But people got really excited because the gray box really shows overall there was no change in the 6 months. So this brought about this whole idea that maybe there's neuroprotection happening with the high intensity cardio. That was not necessarily shown at the 60 to 65 and the usual care. So I know when this study came out, I kind of got a gut punch in my stomach of here I'd been telling people just do anything you want. And it shows that 60 to 65% may not really be doing a whole lot. So we've really been trying to, I think, increase the intensity of our exercise prescription. We do need to clear any prior history. So again, a lot of you might have Parkinson's, but you may have something else. Maybe you have some heart problems. Maybe you have some joint problems. So MSK is musculoskeletal problems. We need to clear knees and hips and back. And we want to focus on intense aerobic exercise. What that looks like is going to be different for each and every one of you. Ideally, that's going to happen best if you're doing it early in the diagnosis. Obviously, movement's a whole lot easier early in the diagnosis than in the later stages. But I also think it's really important that we kind of talk to you as people and say, what are you actually going to do? I had a client several years ago who hated exercise. She had never exercised in her life. She was a huge musician. And she said, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to exercise. I would never take this model and expect her to be working out at 80 to 85% of her max heart rate. Instead, we encouraged her to maybe start doing daily walks outside in nature. And she was okay with that. So again, ideally, exercise intensely is good, but it may not be for everyone. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this Sparks 3 study in a few slides. Next slide. So again, what does this high intensity look like? If it's easy, it's probably not doing a lot for your brain. So if nothing else, if you can ask yourself, how hard am I working? And if I'm on a 1 to 3, which is a very light to light activity, we really want you to try to increase it. Sometimes I'll suggest intervals, which means maybe you try to bump it up to a 7 to 8 and then come back down to a 4 or 6 or 2 or a 3 if 30 minutes at this high intensity seems really hard. We also want you to start slowly. So we don't want you to go too fast or too hard and end up hurting yourself. That can be really frustrating for yourself because then all of a sudden you can't exercise at all. So we're going to slowly have you increase that challenge level. And if you haven't been a big exerciser, this might be a good time to consult with either a physical therapist, such as myself, or an exercise trainer, one of the Nancys, or someone near where you live to kind of help you create a good exercise program that has this intense model. Next slide. So what type of exercise should I do? Well, this came out a few years ago from the American Physical Therapy Association. So this is the big physical therapy group that kind of tells me as a physical therapist what I should be doing with my patients. So this was a clinical practice guideline. And basically on the far left, you can see all these different types of intervention, from cardio to strength training to balance exercises. And on the far right, you can see how strong that recommendation is. For the most part, everything's really strong. The two that are considered weak are telerehabilitation and flexibility exercises. My caveat to that is this was published in 2021. Telerehab, I never did until 2020 when COVID happens. So I think telerehabilitation, when this guideline came out, was so new that there weren't great studies that were being done. So I would kind of caution you on telerehab not having great evidence, just because I don't think there's great evidence out there when this publication was done. And my guess is when they update it, it will probably improve. Flexibility, I'm also going to caution you on. Oftentimes, this is not included in studies unless it's considered the control group. So I would argue that flexibility is just as important as all the other ones. But again, there's not great clinical trials showing that. But from a practical standpoint of seeing all of you guys for the last 20 years, y'all need to be stretching. Next slide. So there were a lot of questions about current exercise studies. And I thought I'd kind of show you what's out there from a national lens and then kind of zoom in on Oregon. So I don't know if any of you have ever looked at this, but you can do clinicaltrials.gov. I'm hoping the site is back up and running now that our government is back up and running. In that, you can see any clinical trial that's really being held by NIH, though there's also lots that are international. So I put in, this was a couple of weeks ago, Parkinson's for my condition. And for intervention, I put exercise. And there were currently 510 studies that were registered, which is fantastic. Then there's a little button that says study status, in which case I hit currently recruiting. So there's some studies that are in the process of getting up and running and aren't recruiting yet. And then there's some studies that are in the analysis piece. So they're no longer recruiting, but they're still kind of ongoing. They haven't started publishing data yet. And there's currently 77 studies that are currently recruiting specifically on Parkinson's and exercise. Next slide. So here are 3 current Oregon exercise trials. So again, all of these are interventional trials that are going on at OHSU. So the first one is Sparks. This is kind of what I alluded to earlier. This is the Sparks 3. This is the follow-up of the Sparks 2 that showed high intensity was potentially neuroprotective. This one is a multi-site study. I think there's 20 or 30 sites. It's international. They're looking for newly diagnosed people and ideally not doing lots of exercise right now. You're randomized into one of two groups, either moderate intensity or high intensity, and they're going to follow people for 18 months on this. So they're going to be doing exercise for 18 months and then follow them for 2 years. And there's so much excitement for this study because I want to say there's over 300 people in it. It's a huge study, and I think we're going to learn so much. They're also looking at lots of novel markers to kind of see how people change with exercise, whether it be scans of their brain, spinal tap fluid, blood tests, and that type of thing. So they're really looking at different biomarkers. So a lot of good is going to come from this study. OHSU is recruiting probably for the next couple months. They hope to be done in June. And then since they're going to follow people for 2 years, it will probably be 2028 before we start seeing anything to come out of this study. There's the TelePD study, which is looking at the telerehabilitation piece. So this study has been going on for a couple of years. This is looking at, is telerehabilitation as effective of what we would consider normal standard care? You come in, you see a PT, we give you exercises for you to do at home. So that you're seeing 3 times a week for 4 weeks. If you get randomized into the telerehab versus the unsupervised home program. And then the new program is the Turnet study. This is, again, another international randomized controlled study, in which case we're trying to see if this new turning program can help with freezing of gait. So half the people get the new turning program and half the people get a strengthening program, which is kind of nice. Both of these, the TelePD and then, well, actually all 3 of these studies, it's nice because everybody gets exercise. It's just a different form. Some studies you get nothing at all, which is always sad. And this one you are seeing 3 times a week for 6 weeks. And this one's done at Pro, which is great. Next slide. So all of that to say, what are you supposed to be doing on a weekly basis for exercise? And a bunch of really smart people came together in 2020. I believe Nancy Nelson was one of them. And came up with these Parkinson's exercise recommendations. And this was put together between the American College of Sports Medicine and the Parkinson's Foundation. And the great thing I love about this slide is it's 1 page, easy print off through the Parkinson's Foundation. And it breaks down the different aspects. The one thing I don't like about this slide is if you add up all of the things you're supposed to do, aerobic exercise 3 times a week, strength exercise 3 times a week, balance exercise 3 times a week, and stretching 3 times a week, you're now supposed to be exercising 12 days a week, which is really hard to do. Nancy will talk about this a little bit more. So we need to figure out how to combine some of these exercises. On the bottom right, it does say 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week, which I think is really important. So hopefully we can combine some of the strength training, the balance exercises, and aerobic together to get that moderate to vigorous exercise, that high intensity, get your heart rate up, get you working really hard in this multidimensional exercise to help combat your motor and your non-motor symptoms. And even though, again, there weren't great studies for flexibility, we still want you to be stretching. And so Nancy is going to talk to us next about maybe a few things about this slide. Do we want to hold on this slide?
Yes, yes, please.
And then she's going to talk about kind of new things that are coming up since this is a few years old. Take it away, Nancy.
Okay. Yeah, but thank you, Jenny. You touched a lot on this. So I wanted to go back to, if you think to Jenny's slide about where exercise has been on the spectrum from the time people were diagnosed with Parkinson's until research studies being done currently. If you remember that slide, it was like in the 2000s when some of the animal studies were being done with the mice and the treadmills and everything else. But it really wasn't until 2020 that somebody said, well, what exactly should people with Parkinson's be doing for exercise? We had no guidelines. I mean, Nancy and I were both teaching Parkinson's exercises at the YMCA in 1997. And it was not quite as free of care, but we were told not to go too hard on them. We didn't know. And so in 2020, the Parkinson's Foundation and the American College of Sports Medicine, they came together and they brought a bunch of fitness professionals, physical therapists, exercise physiologists all together, convened us to really talk about, based on research and based what we know, working with people with Parkinson's, what is it that people with Parkinson's need? And these were not published until May of 2021, but Jenny's right. 100. When you look at this, how am I going to do aerobic activity 3 times a week for at least 30 minutes? Strength training 2 to 3 non-consecutive days a week, and then I have to do all this balance, agility, and multitasking 2 to 3 days a week, and then stretch too. Well, that can be totally, totally overwhelming. Um, and in a moment, I want to talk a little bit about how to not make it so overwhelming. But I do want to talk about each one of these categories a little bit because they were really developed based upon the research that's being done. So we all know what aerobic activity is. It's the large continual movement of your larger muscle groups. It could be swimming, biking, running, brisk walking. And we know for a fact, for health reasons and years of studying general population, we need aerobic activity for a healthy heart, right? It can help reduce blood pressure, help manage stress. But aerobic activity also serves as a good primer. It primes your brain. It gets them ready. So if you're doing aerobic activity and then you want to do some other type of skill training, like the column that says balance, agility, and multitasking, it's good to get a little bit of aerobic activity before you do those things because you're more ready. You're more ready to do those skills. You need strength training. And if you stop and think about posturing, what ends up happening with Parkinson's is oftentimes it's a forward head, rounded shoulder, narrow base of support. And what's happening is all those muscles, those flexor muscles on the front side of your body are being constantly contracted and they're really tight. And then on the back side of your body, those extensor muscles get overstretched. And usually an overstretched muscle is a weak muscle. So when you think about strength training, you really want to target strengthening. And I think of those muscles as postural muscles. Those are the muscles that are going to hold you up against gravity. So you want to work on strengthening those back muscles and really work on the stretching of the flexor muscles. It's good to be strong all over to hold your body up, but thinking about what we could do to help combat some of that posture. And then balance, agility, multitasking. I'm going to talk about this column because we're adding to it, but I'm sorry to say it's just not your motor system that is impacted by Parkinson's. Sometimes your cognition is impacted. By doing things like working on agility and multitasking and balance, you're actually also helping your cognition. And as Jenny just said, if you think of one of the cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's, it's rigidity. And so stretching, you should be stretching every day, even though this recommendation is for 2 to 3 times a week. So there was a method behind the madness in coming up with these guidelines. And I don't want you to be overwhelmed. So if I could have the next slide, please, Mike. Because research is always evolving and that research with exercise has grown exponentially over the years. The Parkinson's Foundation is in the process, and I believe they've been updated, but they're just not published updates to that little form, the little chart. And oh, by the way, if you want that chart, you could go to parkinsons.org and then search exercise guidelines, and you can print that chart out yourself. But the column that we just saw on balance, agility, and multitasking is going to be added to, and the key words that are going to be added to that column is function and neuromotor training. And functional training is really type of exercise that mimics the types of activities that you need to do every day. And the part of your brain that's impacted significantly by Parkinson's is the part of your brain that is responsible for those habitual everyday tasks that we need to get through just to get through our day. If you think about, getting up from a chair, walking away from a counter. And so functional training is so important to really help reinforce and re-engage those habitual patterns. So things that you would do with functional training, think about, I remember Jenny and I going to some trainings and having people do a 30-second sit to stand. But think about how many times you get up and down out of a chair or toileting or walking away, from the table. That's a skill. That's really a skill that you need. I don't know if any of you are feeling stiff and having a hard time in bed, rolling over in bed, or turning. Turning's often a time where people often have a fall because that transition to turn is difficult. So working on movements that really mimic those day-to-day activities, that's going to help you do your daily tasks more easily. And then neuromotor training. Neuromotor training is really an integration of your physical movements with cognitive tasks. And the goal is really to help improve the connection between your brain and your body. And so, how would you do neuromotor training? It's really combining physical exercises with different mental challenges to improve your coordination. If you've been to a physical therapist and you've done a timed up and go where you have to stand up from a chair and walk to a cone, turn around and come back, and then they do silly things like make you count backwards by 3 from 97 as you do that. So the goal is to kind of get that neuro and motor connection to help you improve your coordination. It actually helps you improve your balance and agility as well. It involves dual tasking. Um, can you just walk as big and fast as you can and talk to your neighbor and keep up your task? Or can you pass a ball around your back or toss a scarf and catch it as you're doing something else? And there's lots of great specific exercises that you can do in your day-to-day life we probably don't think as integrating cognition and physical, but just stepping in different directions. Tai Chi is a great program where you have some working memory. You have to remember the forms, and you're working on your breath and your flow. Yoga, dance, pickleball, all those activities. Ping pong is huge now, and rock climbing is huge. But all those types of activity require more than just your motor skills. It requires your cognition as well. Next slide, please. So why should I exercise? Jenny just talked about her person that hated to exercise and said she wasn't going to exercise again. But if you think about some of the really classic symptoms that a lot of people with Parkinson's experience, it can really help target those symptoms that you struggle with. I talked about rigidity a moment ago with stretching. I mean, particularly in your hips and around your spine. So, doing types of exercises where you're twisting, you're rotating, and doing a lot of good stretching where you're opening up that front side of your body is really going to help target that symptom of rigidity. And then the old cardinal symptom I call it the old cardinal symptom of Parkinson's, bradykinesia, that slow, small movement. Well, how can we counteract that? By moving big and fast, by doing exercise that are high amplitude And of course, this is where I have to put my plug in for a type of exercise that I'm totally sold on, from Parkinson Wellness Recovery, PWR Power. The power moves are all high amplitude exercises, moving big and fast. Um, and if you're going to go and start thinking about moving big and fast on your own, that remember that last little arrow is quality over quantity. So if you feel yourself kind of falling back, slower, rounding your posture, it's okay to take a moment and just reset and say, okay, let's go. Here I go. And Nancy and I both have a phrase that we love using. If it doesn't feel big, it's not big enough. And so that's really true. Exercise can also help with posture. I talked about that a moment ago when I was talking about strength training, because we want to get out of this forward rounding posture. We want to stretch those flexor muscles on the front side. And when Jenny and Nancy and I met, we all decided the best tool you could have in your toolbox at home is a foam roller. And you can work on it many ways, but just laying vertically on that foam roller and opening up that whole front side of your body. That's where maybe a trained professional might be able to help you work with the foam roller. And exercise can also help with falls and freezing. And this is one area where you can take your medication, but it really doesn't help so much with falls and freezing. So working on number one, balance and dual task activity. The research actually points to that if you work on your balance, it actually helps with your freezing and your falls, as same with as dual tasking. Um, and I had a thought and it just went like right over my head. Um, I'll get back to it if I remember. And then finally, functional mobility, what I was just talking about that part of your brain that really is impacted is that part of your brain that impacts that ability to do those habitual movements. So working on things like sit to stand, working on rolling over, working on getting up and down from the floor. And a lot of people see pain as a barrier to exercise. I don't want to come to class because I just hurt so much. When actuality, motion is lotion. It actually will help you lubricate those joints, and you might find that you feel better after you've had a session. And it doesn't need to be one of those all out intense sessions, but that movement can really help manage your pain. So to answer that question, I answered it really long, but in short, your exercise can really help target some of the specific symptoms that are common with Parkinson disease. Next slide, please. And I'm going to let Jenny take over from here. I'm going to silent myself.
So this is taken from that same article with the petal flower. And I just read this in the last week, and I thought, again, this answers a lot of the questions that have been coming in of how should I exercise given my current state? And I know this slide is really small, so we're going to take it bit by bit. Mike, if you can just hit next. So first, the newly diagnosed person. So I'm going to argue in today's world of poor access, by the time you get diagnosed, you probably already have some issues. So most of you are going to be answering yes to this. But either way, if you're not having any issues, you should really be exercising that 2.5 hours, which is the 150 minutes per week. If you're having some issues, you might consider checking in with someone and really trying to make sure you get this exercise program that's really tailored on where you are. Also, I kind of circled monitoring excessive or insufficient exercise habits. So again, most people, I'm going to argue, are probably not exercising enough and need to dial it up a little bit. We do get some people that I think are putting a little bit too much of their energy into exercise, and we want to kind of moderate that out a little bit. Go ahead and hit next. So then we're going to look at, well, what happens if you have Parkinson's and you're starting to have problems with your balance? And here you can see there isn't one mode of exercise that's the best. So they have just this huge example list of walking, Nordic walking, dancing, boxing, pool exercises, climbing. Nancy Nelson said rock climbing. That's really taken off in the last couple of years. Karate, Pilates. With that said, you want to make sure you're doing the exercise safely. So this might be another time to check in with people to make sure that you're not going to get hurt. So you might want to be checking in with a Parkinson specific PT at this point or a Parkinson specific trainer. Also, it says prescription of walking aids to facilitate walking exercise. So this is a time where sometimes I say, sometimes you can do more with a little bit of support. I'd rather you walk with a trekking pole or with a walker so that you can walk safely than not walk at all. So that's kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift for people. On the right, we have difficulties with transfers and postures. So this leads in perfectly with what Nancy Nelson was just saying, function, function, function. So if you're having problems getting in and out of a chair, guess what? We're going to have you practice doing yoga and Pilates, where you're probably going to be you're going to be rolling, you're going to be getting on and off the floor, you're going to be practicing getting in and out of chair pose. So you're going to practice what you're having problems with. Also, all of these things are really, really good for posture, primarily because they're focusing on what Nancy was saying, lots of stretching, opening up the chest, and working on strengthening your back muscles. And go ahead and hit next. What happens if you're having problems with mood and cognition? So the classic non-motor symptoms. Here, I thought it was really interesting. They encourage people, maybe this is a great time to join a class, partly because you get that informal support group. And I know both Nancy's have really struggled with virtual classes, but they've learned how to navigate it through the years of even with virtual. They open the room up a little bit early. They keep it open a little bit late to allow for that connectiveness. But I think definitely in person is fantastic as well. Again, there's not one type of exercise that pops out, but I think sometimes doing exercise with people is going to help both the mood and cognition a little bit more. And on the far right, what happens if you have advanced Parkinson's or your loved one has advanced Parkinson's? I think it's great that they call out there's still a role for exercise here. Are they going to be doing high intensity exercise? No, but they're going to be doing stretching to help with pain. They're going to be practicing the very same rolling that Nancy Nelson was doing on the floor, but this time it's going to be in bed, partly to prevent pressure sores or again, lying in one position for too long. So I think irregardless of where you are in the disease, there's a role for exercise. Now I'm going to hand it back to Nancy Nelson. Next slide.
So what would an ideal week of exercise look for you? Nancy Barlow is going to talk about putting together a plan in a few slides, but I have people ask me all the time, what is the best exercise to do? And really, there's not a good answer. There's not one exercise. If you think about those Parkinson's Foundation's recommendations, what you need to include, number one is what do you like to do? Because let's face it, if I tell you the running on a treadmill at 6 miles an hour is going to be the best thing for you to do and you hate it, how likely is it that you're going to continue to do that? So finding something that's going to challenge you that you enjoy doing. And then what's convenient to you. If you join a class that's a 45-minute drive to get there and back, how long are you really going to stick to it? And then what are your goals? Because I think having exercise that is salient for you, that means something to you, something you want to improve on, something you're struggling with, it might be a little bit more of motivation to help you stick with your goals. So finding something that's going to help you accomplish your goals. Mixing things up. Novelty is really key in keeping your attentional focus, which is also a really important part of exercise, is having that attentional focus that helps your cognition. So doing things that are a little novel and new. And remember what Jenny said, intensity does matter. And just a few examples we threw in here. Of course, I'm giving another plug for the power moves. I promise I'm not getting paid for those plugs, but doing functional type of activities, walking, yard work, Tai Chi, boxing, ping pong, pickleball, just a few examples. And again, I want to piggyback a little bit on what Jenny said earlier. I know that 150 minutes a week could seem really overwhelming, but finding things that you like to do that are easy, convenient for you, that help meet your goals, and just kind of gradually building on it. You don't need to jump in to 150 minutes a week. Next slide. And so question is, and particularly during COVID, it was terrible teaching on Zoom all those years. But I also get asked, should I exercise by myself or in a group? I think it goes back to those goals. Are you more of an introvert? Is the drive to get to where you want to go too long? But there's so much power in a group situation. A lot of times with people with Parkinson's begin to isolate themselves. They have a little bit of that stigma. They don't want to get out. They're embarrassed. People are going to notice their tremor. But if you can find a group of other people with Parkinson's, you're working with people that are just like yourself, and you get that socialization and that social connection. I'm going to just go out there on a limb and I'm going to say that's just as important as the exercise in keeping you mobile and motivated. If you're in a group, hopefully you have a qualified instructor who is going to give you feedback on quality of movement, so you're not just going through the motions. And getting into a group and being with a group of people that are like yourselves, you're looking at other people that are exercising, and maybe you see them doing things that you weren't able to do. And you're like, well, if I can do that, if they can do that, I can do that. So it gives you a sense of hope and a little bit of empowerment to help take charge of your life. And maybe you're an introvert, maybe getting to the gym, maybe you've decided to give up driving, or it's not convenient to get to a gym and it costs too much. Exercising by yourself is also an option. But I do think that if you're going to start by yourself, you might want to get some kind of professional guidance, either from a physical therapist to get started or a personal trainer to help you at least know what and how you should be doing. And should you exercise in person or virtual? Well, in person, I just raved about the groups, same benefit as a group. And then you have the safety monitoring of the instructor. Virtual, just improved access to all your options. I mean, Jenny knows of a virtual what would you call it, Jenny? Like a little bank of all the virtual classes through Stanford University that you could just Google virtual classes and you could probably find just about anything that you wanted to.
So if you
Jenny,
Google Stanford Exercise Parkinson's, you'll get a
okay.
whole host of either virtual classes or on demand, many of which are free. And they have every type of exercise you can imagine.
And there's lots of other great programs out there that are also offering virtual. And I think it's just a matter of your needs, your preference, and what's going to keep you moving, what's going to keep you doing it. Next slide. This is you, isn't it, Nancy? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Nancy B.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. And what are you thinking? Are you all just kind of like, wow, that's a lot of information, and how do I make sense of it? So I have like 3 or 4 slides here that I was just going to try to work through with you to try to tailor it so that you can get this information and put a plan into action. So how do you get started with all the information? Okay, so first, schedule it. So figure out in your week, what days, what times of the days you have available, and block those out for exercise. You also want to be doing your exercise when you're on your best on state with your medications. So think about that when you're making, ideal schedule for yourself. Build in accountability, build in exercise with a friend or a buddy or going to a class. All those things provide accountability so that you can't not attend or not go through your exercise session. Finding a great place to exercise is important. You need to feel comfortable where you're exercising in a gym. If you're exercising at home, you need to have a very safe space, open area, so having a great place to exercise is important. Because if you don't, you're not going to want to exercise, right? Because it's too constrictive. So then you need to think about what kind of exercise you want to do. I'm going to go through a few exercises in a moment here, but what are you interested in? What matches your goals? Do you like to be out on the water kayaking? Then maybe you're going to do kayaking. Or do you like to do the rock climbing? Maybe you're going to rock climb. So picking an exercise and zeroing in on that is really important as well. And then we've mentioned it, Jenny's mentioned it, Nancy's mentioned it, but sometimes getting started, it's really helpful to work with a Parkinson's trained physical therapist or a personal trainer that can just help you get a plan that's individualized for you to get started. So will you move the slide, please? Okay, so we talked about that. I think everybody is probably on board and understands that you have to find an exercise that you enjoy. And again, it doesn't have to just be a gym exercise. It doesn't have to just be biking or running on a treadmill. It can be those other things that we've talked about, like pickleball or table tennis or horseback riding or different things. So picking what you like to do so that you'll continue to do that. Choose something that's convenient to the time of day or to where you live. Some people do, but it's really hard to sustain exercise if you're driving over an hour to get to a particular class. So finding something that will be convenient to where you are. Again, we talked a little bit already about a challenging and intensity. You got to find that sweet spot. If you're exercising and it's too easy, you're not going to get the benefits. But if you're exercising and it's too hard, you're also not going to quite get the benefits. So I always talk about finding that sweet spot in my classes. So, and you'll find some days your sweet spots are a little bit different. Some days you're feeling really energetic. Some days you're feeling really tired, but kind of trying to work at that 7 to 8 on that RPE chart that Jenny showed several slides ago. So that's really important. And then, like Nancy actually just said, but mix it up, do different things. Don't feel like you have to only do one type of exercise. Okay. Advance the slide. Thank you. Okay, so we have a list of just different kinds of exercises. And when you go to the chart that Nancy talked about and Jenny talked about from the Parkinson's Foundation, that is pretty overwhelming. And in this chart, if you look at every section, and I'm not going to go through and read every section, but if you look at the different sections, a lot of those categories cross over each other. So it could be like you're doing agility training down at the bottom. Agility training is really important. It's a mix of multi-directional movement and coordination exercises. But it could also be considered cardio if you are at a high intensity level on the kind of agility. Same with ball sports. That could be agility because your footwork, you're moving around, but then you could also get the cardio benefit. So sometimes one activity will check the boxes on the different categories that are recommended. And I think that's important because that chart is so good but it can be so overwhelming, right? So, if you're cycling, I was going to mention this because I think this is always a good thing for people to know. Cycling can be done on a stationary bike. It can be done out on the road. We know there's been some exercise studies showing that cycling is beneficial. But where that needs to be is you need to be pedaling fast, so greater than 85 revolutions per minute continuously to get the benefits of the study that said cycling was beneficial for people. Okay. And I think there's the yoga and the tai chi and the dance, and all of those are really good forms of exercise as well. So, and there's other things obviously that aren't on this list. So if you advance the slide, and this is the one that I feel like might be most helpful for you. So these are the 4 categories off the Parkinson's Foundation chart. So cardio, you want to do 30 minutes 3 times a week at your moderate to high intensity. Examples, biking and walking. It could be those other things. So you can check the boxes. So I know I can do cardio on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Okay, so you can see where you're going to do the cardio. The strength, you know you want to do that a couple times a week. You can check Tuesday and Thursday boxes, or any other 2 boxes that you want. I'm just giving you examples. And then when you come into the balance and agility and multitasking, you can figure out which days you want to do that. And again, there might be some crossover with the cardio in that. And then stretching, we just say at least 10 minutes every day or more. So, so this chart just kind of helps you check the boxes so that you're hitting the different recommendation categories. And then we'll be adding to it when the new additions that Nancy was talking about are published. So to that. Okay. All right, so if you advance the slide, so we're going to move into, we have these 3 amazing people that are going to talk about their stories of exercise, and they all come from a little different perspective, so it's going to be very interesting to hear. So Jeannie, I'm going to turn it over to you,
Okay.
And let you take it, okay?
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. I'll start with, I was diagnosed in 2008. The first neurologist I went to said I had an old brain and didn't know what was wrong with it. And I contacted Parkinson's Resources of Oregon and said, do you think I should go to another doctor and get another idea of what I have? And they said, yes, good idea. So I went to OHSU. I got diagnosed by Dr. Nutt, luckily, the head, and he connected, OHSU connected me with Andy Sater, who was wonderful. And she told me about trekking poles. She told me about all the bike studies. And that really helped me because I was falling down on my way to work at that point. So that really helped me. Then I got involved in this wonderful study, which probably turned my life around. It was called Exercise and Education. And it was run by the 2 Nancys, who made sure you understood that you could do more than you were doing. And I'll never forget Nancy yelling at me and saying, Jeannie, power up, Jeannie, power up, you know. So that was wonderful because it explained to me that I could do more than I was doing. And it really kind of turned the whole Parkinson diagnosis around. So after going through that program, I started going to LA Fitness 5 days a week. Before I was diagnosed, the reason I was going to the doctor was because I had what they call a geriatric pregnancy, and I wasn't exercising much at all after the pregnancy. So So after the exercise and education, it kind of turned it around. I started exercising on a regular basis. And I got involved with the Nancy Barlow initially, I believe, had the class out in the Northwest, and you and we got involved in that class. And you talked about the importance of a group, and that group was really something else. We were quite the group. We actually wrote a book on Parkinson's, and still today in Nancy Barlow's class, we have at least four of the people from that original class. So we really have, and we're writing a new book about stage 3 Parkinson's. So, the social aspects of it are really important because we encourage each other. We say, good to see you. You made it to class. Good job. That kind of thing. So that was really helpful. So now I see Nancy 2 days a week, Nancy Barlow, 2 days a week. And I do aqua aerobics on Wednesday. I also do a stationary bike. And I have PT with Jenny, who I can't say enough about Jenny because Jenny listens to you. She listens to you. When you say you have an issue, she works on that. She says, okay, how can we fix this? What can you do? What do you want to do? What will you do? So she's really helpful. And the latest project her and I took was I had to walk my daughter down the aisle with my David. And we did that successfully, by the way. Yay. So that's what I'm doing right now. But I wanted to emphasize that with Parkinson's, you're always going to have ups and downs, and you're going to have issues where where you have a fall or you have an injury or the flu or something, or you go on vacation to Peru and you don't exercise for a while. And when you come back, you feel, I can't push through. So, don't look at it as you can't do it. Look at it, start out with 5 minutes on the stationary bike, then 10 minutes on the stationary bike, and work your way up. Even in class, Nancy's really good about, okay, if you need to sit through, half a class to begin with, then work your way up so that you can stand through the whole class. So understand that you're going to have ups and downs, and don't let that discourage you. Don't let that stop you. You can do it, as both the Nancys tell you all the time. So other than that, my motivation is my daughter. That's she wants to get pregnant right away. So I hopefully I'll have a little pumpkin to hug and take care of, and getting out of a chair. That's a big motivation for me because I see the inability of getting out of a chair as another stage. So I really want to be able to do that. And the exercise, Nancy's class is very social. So it's part of socializing. So that's my story. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jeannie. I'm
Uh-huh.
Amy LaValle. I was diagnosed in 2016, just after having my third child. So I had three young ones when I was diagnosed.
Wow.
Before the diagnosis, I didn't exercise. That was virtually non-existent, unless you count chasing them in the park. So I was active, but I didn't have a regular routine. Once I was diagnosed, I joined a local community center and I started taking a Zumba class because I knew I wasn't going to do the circuits. I wasn't going to do the other exercises, but I would dance because afterwards you didn't feel like you were working out. You were smiling, great music, but I was getting a good workout. And as I continued that, I found my community. I became friends with the other people in the class. I became good friends with the instructor. So when I was having those days when I didn't want to exercise, I knew I needed to be accountable for them. I knew they would miss me. So they're the reasons I went. That, and I also had to prepay for childcare, and I didn't want to waste my money. So it's funny. I don't exercise for myself. I exercise for others, and I recognize that in myself. So that is one of my motivating factors. Um, I have signed up for a relay race because I know my team will count on me. So again, those days when I don't feel like moving, I'm like, they're counting on me, so I've got to do it. As I became more comfortable with the dance and gained my community, I started experimenting with the other classes and had more confidence and felt more comfortable. And I diversified. And pretty soon I was doing those circuits and those step aerobic classes. I then moved, and I moved to a small town that doesn't have a community center like that. So I'm now having to work out on my own. We've set up in the garage a little gym for me with a foam roller and mats. We have a rowing machine, and I have resistant bands. So I have zero excuse to not exercise. But as the Nancys were just saying, that it's kind of on when you're alone, you don't have that motivating factor. You don't have that person saying, "No, no, you almost got it, one more." So it's hard. One thing I do is I take the dog for a walk. And when I come back, I go straight to the garage. There is no sitting, no stopping, no passing go. I go right to the garage because if I sit, I'm not getting back up. It's the first law of Parkinson's. If you're in motion, you'll stay in motion. Um, and so again, I do the dance. There's so many free exercise routines you can find, as Jenny was saying, and on YouTube. I even the other day I put on a dance exercise and it was in German. So I figured that was my cognitive side. I was interpreting, trying to figure out what they were saying and getting along, and it was challenging. And I had a great time doing it, and no one was there to watch and judge me. Um, when you exercise, you get in a good routine and you build those habits. But as Jeannie was saying, when life takes over and you get sick or you have another event and you stop exercising, oh gosh, it's hard to get back going again. So as Jeannie was saying, when I'm done walking the dog, I say, okay, 10 minutes. I can do 10 minutes. And usually after those 10 minutes, I'm like, oh, do a couple more. Let me go. So just continue doing those 10 minutes for a week and then build on it and then diversify and build that habit. So it just becomes part of your routine. You know, exercise is medicine. You're not going to skip a pill, so don't skip the exercise. Even if it's just a walk, do something to develop that routine. Um, I just have a couple like little tips and tricks I was going to share. Lay out your workout clothes the night before. So when you wake up, there's no decision to be made. Put them on and pre-plan that exercise the night before too, so you know what video you're going to watch. Reward yourself. Get some cute workout clothes, comfortable shoes. That's going to make you feel better. It's going to give you that little boost of dopamine. When an exercise is particularly hard, I find if I smile, even if it's like a really tough grin, that kind of makes me feel better. And I'm practicing my facial muscles too. Um, and fitting in the exercise during your daily routine. You know, you drop something, do a squat to pick it up, and while you're doing it, do a couple more. If you're in the kitchen cooking, grab some cans and do some bicep curls. You know, put some music on and just start wiggling and moving and dancing. You can fit all those little motions in throughout the day. And another thing I do, but I caution, is to practice my balance when I'm brushing my teeth. I have an electric toothbrush. So every 30 seconds, I stand on one foot and it beeps, and then I do the other foot. But please take caution if you do that one. So that is pretty much how I try to fit exercise in with a busy load of kids and driving and soccer and all that stuff. Um, thank you. And I'm handing it over to Rick.
Thank you, Amy. I will go out and shop for some cute workout outfits. You'll have to help me, Nancy. Not sure quite what's involved, but my history starts in the fall about 2 years ago, And my urologist said to me that I had Parkinsonian symptoms. And of course, my immediate reaction is, no, I don't have Parkinson's. I had a guy I'd hired, a brilliant engineer. He had Parkinson's with a very defined tremor. And that was how I sort of viewed Parkinson's. But then as I learned more and I looked back on what had happened in the prior couple of years, I had one bad fall, some broken ribs, stitches, a couple of other things were going on that it suddenly made sense. And I went and talked to Dr. Clark, who decided that I had Parkinson's and put me on some medication. And then I started to get active in looking for what kind of exercise, what kind of therapy I could do. And I had had a very active life before at a couple of one line of demarcation about when I was 31, I was in a car accident and I was in the hospital for 2.5 months. So I'm very lucky to be here. And some things don't move the same way. And I'd always use that as an excuse. And so I was very limited in what I thought I could do. I did swimming. I could still do cross country skiing. I couldn't do downhill. I did a lot of walking. I took up golf because I thought it'd be easy because the ball doesn't move. I was very wrong. Cycling, I got sort of a little bit compulsive about, and I was cycling 100 miles a week and really, really enjoying that. And I had a group of guys I met regularly with, and I felt very. This was all before Dr. Takla suggested I had the Parkinsonian symptoms, and and I was getting some physical therapy related to other injuries I had, and the therapist I had was from Maine, and she was familiar with the Impact PD program and the boxing, and she did a little research for me, and one thing led to the other, and we discovered Nancy Nelson, who was my first exposure to that. Concurrently, I had made contact with a local class of chair yoga with a woman that had actually worked with Parkinson's people before, and she was that started, and I, of course, my immediate attitude was yoga. I'm going to do that, but I really am doing it now almost 2 years, and it's been very, very helpful. And it's chair yoga with stand and also standing. So you have positions in the chair, you have standing position, you have balance. There's a lot of very, very positive things about it. And I started the Impact PD with boxing. And the phrase that I've always used is to explain to people, what is with the boxing? And I say, well, it's about having your mind control your muscles, or have you said neuro something or other in an earlier presentation, but that's how I understand that. And it's been very helpful. But interestingly enough, when I started the class working with the Impact PD, um, one of Nancy's things, she wants everyone to be able to stand independently, get up off the floor. I hadn't thought about that, but I couldn't do it. I could not get off the floor and unless I had a chair or something to grab hold of. And I've been probably dealing with that for years because I would do limited exercise at home. I always had next to the bed, I grab hold of the bed, lift myself up. Didn't even occur to me I had this problem. But when I started working on the exercise program, I did, and eventually got to the point where Nancy would say I pop up. I don't quite say pop. I get up, and my wife has also watched me sort of struggle with this, and she's always, and we'll meet people that we know, and some of which have some Parkinsonian symptoms, and Vicky will talk about how, well, I used to not be able to get off the floor. And I think she almost wants me to get on the floor and do a burpee and hop up. But I'm not sure. But it was very, very important sort of in my development. One of the things I do though that helps me immensely is the minute I get out of bed in the morning, I will do about 20 minutes of stretching exercises both on the floor and standing up. And if I have one particular muscle, sometimes my back will get really tight. Before I get out of bed, I'll stick a heating pad on it for 10 or so minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and that loosens it up and the stretching is more effective. But I've gotten to do that regularly. And when I travel, it's a little more difficult because you don't have the same props, but that's been very, very important. The other thing that's been helpful to me is I do I do the yoga, I do the impact PD and the boxing, and I do walking. I try to walk a mile a day, but the emphasis is on style. I use the trekking poles, and I found that I have to be very conscious of when I eat, when I take my carbidopa, levodopa, because it all balances. And when I have had problems, I found that if I go longer, at a certain point, I'll hit a wall in terms of my durability, and then my stride will get off, my gait will get off. I'll start to fall. All these horrible things start to happen. So my emphasis is on my mile a day is to use those poles to keep up a steady rhythm. And I'll see people in the neighborhood and they say, "Well, we see you out there with your arms moving back and forth." I said, "That's the idea." And I find that one of the steps that I had to take is to realize that the trekking poles, if we're going to go down and go shopping or walk around downtown Ben or the down to the mill, at one point I wouldn't take the poles because I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want some old guy walking around with silly poles. I take them everywhere now. If I'm going to be out or if we're going to go to something over at the fairgrounds where you're spending time walking around looking at exhibits, I'll just take the poles and I really don't give a darn about the emphasis. I learned that when I think I shared this with Nancy, when I was 7 years old, I was in a play, Alice in Wonderland, and I played a card. And when we started to perform, all the people with their cards were wearing bathing suits underneath. Well, I didn't get the memo, and I was in my underwear. And as I developed a theory later on in life that it's the underwear theory of life. If you walk down the street in the underwear, the person that's really going to bother is you, not anybody else. And I viewed that with trekking poles, I shouldn't be concerned. I can always swat somebody with one, but it's just it's very, very, very helpful. But so the poles, I'm a big proponent of that. It's really helped out. The boxing is it is surprising. The hardest thing is remembering there's a mental part of it too, that if you're going to use your left, your right, your left, you got to think about it. And sometimes I can't remember what it is we're supposed to do. And that's the cognitive work. And the other thing cognitively that I do is I teach a course at Oregon State in energy regulation. It's a required upper division course in the Energy Systems Engineering degree program. And I started my ninth year next year, and I've been in front of young people. I got to work on my voice. I don't have a voice problem. I got to work on my logic. I have to, because think about doing something different. It's not exactly the exercise that I do with Nancy or otherwise, but it gets me thinking, it gets me moving, and and using my voice. I don't want to. Many of my engineering students are very shy young men and women. They don't want to speak up, and I have to convince them you got to speak. Maybe they all have Parkinson's. I don't know, but it makes it fun. But the difference for me that all this has made is one of the things that I really had a problem with going back to before I was diagnosed. I didn't have much stamina when standing. I couldn't, standing around listening to 15 minutes of somebody describing what this particular exhibit or this that was very, very tiring to me. I really started to work away from it. It doesn't bother me. I sleep better, particularly if I walk and sleep better. My legs don't get all restless and feel tight. Everything works better with the exercise. And Nancy said, "Well, how do you stay motivated?" Well, I stay motivated because I used to think before I learned how to get up, the best description of me was a beached whale. So I want to try to get away from the beached whale syndrome, and I keep reminding myself of that. And it's really, I feel very honored to be part of this group of all of you have been, I think, dealing with this much longer than I have, and your attitude and your ideas are very, very helpful. So
That's
how'd I
great.
do,
Thank
Thank
you.
Nancy?
you.
Thank you,
Did
Rick. I
great.
think that's a great place for us to be able to wrap up. And thank you so much to
Awesome.
Jeannie and the Jenny and our Nancy's and Amy. And I think it's a great point where we can transition over because we do have a few questions that have been submitted while our presentation has been going on, and also had a few that were submitted when people were registering. So why don't I start going through a few of those, and we can see who you feel is the best one to address each question. So the first one was, I think a good one is because many times we were talking about exercise and how we're doing enough. The question is, what's the issue with excessive exercise and what is actually considered to be excessive? And I don't know if the Nancy's or Jenny, you feel you want to take that one on?
Do
You want to
you
go,
do you want
Nancy?
I was going to ask if you
Oh,
wanted to
sure.
go.
I'm going to say when it starts interfering with other parts of your life. And that's why I put that flower figure on. We only have so much time and energy and money in a day. There's some studies that show some of the medications that you can go on. You can become compulsive. You can be a compulsive gambler. You can become a compulsive exerciser. So I'm going to say, you know, in an ideal world, we're exercising an hour a day. But if we start exercising so much that we don't have enough energy to make good, healthy meals, that we don't have enough energy to fill the other societal roles, like maybe you're not working as much, or you're not, you know, going to your grandkids' soccer game because, oops, well, I have to work out with Nancy Nelson then. And so I can't go to my kids' soccer game or grandkids' soccer game. When you start giving up on other parts of your life and exercise is kind of dominating everything, then I would say it's becoming excessive. So hopefully that kind of helps.
And also you're going to start getting injured if
Yep.
you are exercising excessively and you start having, you know, elbow pain or knee pain or whatever. Your body does talk to you with excessive exercise, particularly as you get older.
And I guess the other thing I'll add is as a physical therapist, there is an obesity crisis in our nation, except for those with Parkinson's. So Parkinson's folks tend to be on the thinner side. Part of that's the protein interaction. Part of that's the lack of smell. There's a lot of different factors in it. So I'm going to say if you're also starting to lose too much weight, I would say that would be another yellow flag. You know, we want to be healthy, but we don't want to be underweight by any means.
Great. So another question that was asked is related to being able to achieve that aerobic rate. So the individual shared that they can't reach their aerobic heart rate due to their Parkinson's slowing their heart rate down, as well as being on a beta blocker for a heart rhythm issue. And so really wanting to understand how you evaluate your exercise and if it's putting you into that aerobic range. So that starts bringing in that rate of perceived exertion, or how you would address this.
I think you answered it correctly, Mike. I think, you know, if you have a stunted heart rate because of your Parkinson's, that rate of perceived exertion is really, really the best thing to do. How hard do you feel you're working? And that's 7 to 8. I personally don't like using heart rate so much because of that stunted heart rate and people that have comorbidities are taking beta blockers that slow their heart rate down.
I'll add, so the studies where they were looking at heart rate, those individuals actually went under max heart rate testing. So it was individualized for them. Most individuals don't have access to that. That scale of 1 to 10, the rate of perceived exertion is actually stolen from cardiac rehab. So most people in cardiac rehab, if you have a heart condition, you end up in cardiac rehab 3 times a week for 12 weeks. And oftentimes you're on medications such as beta blockers, which are going to stunt your heart rate response to exercise. So you basically don't get a high elevation of heart rate as you're exercising. So that's where that scale of 1 to 10 really came from. And so we're kind of utilizing that. When we were putting together this presentation, we kind of voted to take out how to calculate your max heart rate, partly because of these issues. It just kind of gets muddy in the water of how people's heart rate kind of responds with Parkinson's. So
Terrific. So this one is a question about indoor exercise. It was submitted when somebody was registering. So they're wondering about indoor exercises for someone who is at a fall risk or it has impulsive behavior movements. And it might be something for all of our panelists of doing indoor exercise or experience balance issues, tips or tricks that you found to be useful. Nancy? And
Why me? Why me? Well, first of all, if you are at a fall risk and exercising indoor can be challenging, I go back to starting off with a physical therapist or an exercise trainer who can work alongside you. I know in Bend, where I work out, they do have bars. And as Rick was saying, maybe that's where you bring your walker or your trekking poles into you. But having someone monitor you if you are at a fall risk, I think would be so important.
If I can add, I find when I'm at my weakest state and I still need to exercise, that the stationary bike is wonderful. That I can get on that bike and I can go, and maybe just for 5 minutes or something. But mine is set up so that it's got a back on the seat, so I'm not going to fall off. So I'm always comfortable doing that.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I'll echo that. If people are diagnosed with Parkinson's and they ask what type of equipment, aside from a foam roll, I usually say a stationary recumbent bike, just because I think from the longevity standpoint, you'll be able to use it for a long time throughout the course of the disease. It allows you for cardio, high intensity, without having to worry about losing your balance. And also, if you have problems with low blood pressure, it's another great option. So I would say a stationary bike is a great solution for that indoor exercise.
Terrific. So somebody else was asking, we touched a little bit about it in your presentation, but I don't know if you want to go into a little bit more depth. It was about the neuroplasticity and the role that it plays in the benefits of exercise for people with Parkinson's.
Nancy, you want to go? He's smiling. Oh, you want me to go? Yeah, so I think where the science really is with animals, where we know for sure that we're making changes to their brains. Some people theorize that potentially with the Sparks data, where they're doing all of these biomarkers for 2 years with this different exercise studies, we'll be able to see what's happening in the brain and what's happening with various biomarkers to really show if there's neuroplasticity in the human brain. So again, at this point, I can't say for sure there's neuroplasticity. We hope there is. Worst case scenario, you'll have a really healthy heart and lung, and you'll have good strength and good functional mobility, kind of what Nancy Nelson was talking about, getting up out of a chair, getting off the floor. Best case scenario are substantia nigra, so the area of the brain that's being affected by Parkinson's will be in better shape. But at this point, we're not 100% sure, just because there's not a great way to really monitor that with exercise.
Very good. So another question was a little bit more specific to the stiffness that's associated with Parkinson's, asking what exercises can I do to help loosen stiff joints, especially like neck stiffness in the back? And are there exercises I can do at home to help balance? And what exercises can I do at home that'll help build leg strength? And I think certainly I preface this by saying many times working with a physical therapist to help really assess those situations or specifics and give you that program is good, but if you can speak more broadly or at a higher level to that question.
Nancy Barlow, it's your turn to answer a question.
Put me on the spot. You guys are so fast, I can't get in. any of those stretching exercises or the yoga or the foam rollers, any torso rotation. You can do things lying down, you can do things standing, you can do things sitting. Any of those are going to address the back stiffness, the neck stiffness. So if that's the deficit is, where you feel really rigid, then that's what you want to work on. So.
Terrific.
And for leg strength, my favorite exercise is purely stand up and sit down as many times as you can in a minute. It's so simple. It's working on something that classically becomes hard. And people come back within a couple weeks and say, it's easier for me to get off the toilet. So I think that's kind of one of my favorite easy, no equipment needed exercises.
One thing I might add is I have a friend who's a retired massage therapist, and a couple of times when my back has really gotten stiff, he's done miracles with me, and that's what made me start using the heating pad before I did my stretching exercise. I couldn't obviously get him over here every morning, and that has really helped me get through that stiffness and where I could start doing exercises that would stretch things out. But everybody's different.
Thanks, Rick. That's good input as well. So, final question, I think I'll also open up certainly anybody that's online with us. If there's still other questions, please put those in the chat and I'll be happy to ask them. But was about related to exercise programs. Somebody has more severe scoliosis that maybe potentially they're experiencing with the Parkinson's. Suggestions as far as ways to connect with a physical therapist or an exercise physiologist. How would you go about helping to try to address an issue like that?
You would go see Jenny.
So I'm going to say any hospital system should have a neurophysical therapist. If you look at the APTA, American Physical Therapy Association, so apta.org, you can do find a PT and you can search for neuro in your area. There's also degenerative disease physical therapies kind of finder that you can look up through the American PT Association. So those are people that are going to specialize in Parkinson's or other degenerative neuro diseases. I'm not registered on that because it's a lot of paperwork and I'm not hurting for business. So those are two ways, I guess a couple different ways for finding a PT. I don't know if Pro has a list of trainers. I'll let Nancy B talk about that in a minute. In terms of scoliosis specifically, I'm going to say this is super common in people with Parkinson's, partly because a lot of people end up with something called Pisa syndrome, which if you can imagine the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they get this kind of sideways shift that happens. Lots of different theories on why that happens, and we don't truly know. But some people come into Parkinson's with scoliosis, and some people develop scoliosis within Parkinson's. Either way, strengthening is super, super important, especially of the back muscles, especially of the glutes, the bottom muscles, I think are important to kind of give yourself good stability. Trying to stretch as much as we can to keep flexibility to help preventing that from getting any worse. And we kind of try this asymmetrical strengthening a little bit of some of the trunk muscles. So I'll see if either of the Nancy's want to add anything. So I'll just say it's again, most people with Parkinson's have something else. So that's just that other thing that you would have with Parkinson's. So I'm going to say it's going to maybe modify some of the exercises that we do. It does not get you off the hook of exercises. And you should still be able to partake in a lot of what we talked about.
Perfect. Well, Jenny, thank you so much. And I think that gives a great wrap up to, I thought was an outstanding presentation. I really want to thank you and Nancy Nelson and Nancy Barlow for sharing such great detail about the benefits of exercise and how it's helping Parkinson's, but also where we see it going. And also, I want to thank Jeannie and Amy and Rick for sharing your personal experiences. I think it's inspiring. I think it helps everybody see the value of getting involved with exercise, and the most important thing, the persistence and how that pays off and how you benefit from it and how it translates into your daily activities and being able to do what you need and you want to be doing. Finally, I want to thank everybody that attended today. If you have additional questions, please feel free to email those to me directly at mike@parkinsonsresources.org, and I will work to get answers from our panelists. And we look forward to seeing you at future events they'll be holding. So everybody, have a great evening, be safe, and we will see you soon. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.